Dust swirled around the wooden fence, shimmering in the afternoon sun. Silas stood tall, his weathered hands resting on the rough surface, eyes squinting at the horizon. The silence of the ranch enveloped him, a world untouched by chaos, yet filled with unspoken burdens. A faint rustle caught his attention. Ilara emerged from the shadows, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. She moved like a whisper, her bare feet barely disturbing the ground below. A fragile porcelain doll, lost in a vast landscape, her eyes held echoes of a past she couldn't remember. As she approached, a flicker of recognition sparked between them, two souls entwined in an unspoken bond. Then, as if summoned by an unseen force, she spoke, her voice a haunting melody of ancient words. Latin spilled forth like sunlight breaking dawn, wrapping around Silas, a connection forged in mystery, igniting a flicker of hope in the silence. Ilara sat on the wooden crate, her heart pounding in rhythm with the distant sounds of the auction. Grime smeared her face, a testament to days spent in uncertainty, but it was the weight of betrayal that truly dulled her spirit. She scanned the crowd, seeking familiar faces among strangers, only to find the hard gazes of men she didn't know, each one representing an echo of her brother's treachery. The sunlight caught the edges of her tattered dress, the fabric a mere shadow of what she once wore. She felt a pulsing ache in her chest, a sense of self slipping away, each heartbeat reminding her that she was someone's forgotten possession. Her brother had promised to protect her, yet here she was, stripped of not just her home but her very identity, as if memory itself had been pried from her mind. The pungent scent of sweat, mixed with the must of hay, filled the air, but Ilara barely noticed. Her focus was drawn to the wooden platform ahead, where the auctioneer's voice rang out, slicing through her fog of despair. Next up, we have this fine specimen, a young girl ready for labor or companionship. The words felt like a noose tightening around her neck, suffocating her hope with their casual cruelty. Silas stood at the edge of the crowd, his rugged silhouette catching the light as he leaned against a weathered post. His clothes, worn yet well kept, told a story of hard work and resilience. He had come seeking help for his ranch, a simple transaction to secure labor. But the moment he laid eyes on Ilara, a strange sensation gripped him. A mix of protectiveness and sorrow washed over him, as if she were a wounded bird caught in a storm. He had seen many faces in his time, but hers, framed by disarray, ignited something deep within him, a need to shield her from the world's cruelty. When she was led onto the platform, her eyes darted around like a deer in headlights, reflecting the confusion and fear that engulfed her. In that fleeting moment, something in Silas's chest tightened. He knew this girl had been stripped of her dignity, yet he felt her spirit flicker beneath the surface, a fragile ember fighting against the winds of despair. He wanted to take her away from all of this, to cocoon her in safety, but the reality of the auction was a stark backdrop to his desires. He pushed through the crowd, trying to ignore the sharp jabs of conscience that came with the realization that he was here to buy labor, not rescue a soul. As the bidding began, Silas watched Ilara's face, each flicker of hope crushed beneath the weight of each offer. The voices around her faded into a cacophony, and Ilara began to feel as if she were floating, detached from the horror unfolding. The sensation felt foreign, memories eluded her grasp, and she wondered if she had ever truly existed beyond this moment. With every bid, she felt her worth being reduced to a mere number. How had she come to this? Questions raced through her mind, but her tongue remained tied, a cruel joke of fate playing upon her lips. By the time Silas made his bid, he was engulfed by a primal instinct. He raised his hand high, the sum rolling off his tongue as if it were a lifeline. A hush fell over the crowd as he spoke, and in that moment Ilara's eyes locked onto his, a fleeting spark igniting hope where none had existed. Silas saw the flicker of recognition, or was it desperation, in her gaze, and for a heartbeat, the chaos around them dissolved into silence. He wasn't merely buying a girl, but extending an olive branch to a spirit lost in the throes of anguish. Yet, the moment was fleeting. The gavel struck, sealing her fate. The transaction was complete, yet the emotional wall separating them felt insurmountable. Silas reached for her, gently guiding her away from the platform, but the weight of her past clung to her like a shroud. Ilara recoiled slightly, the instinct to withdraw stronger than her curiosity or the fragile hope Silas had sparked within her. She felt unwanted, as if she were merely an object moved from one owner to another. As they stepped away from the crowd's hustle, Silas offered quiet reassurance. "You're safe now," he whispered, though the warmth of his breath felt distant against the chill of her reality. Ilara remained silent, her heart a tumult of confusion. She felt as if she were stepping into a void, leaving behind what little she could remember while facing an uncertain future. A part of her wished to trust him, to lean into the warmth he offered, yet another part recoiled, wrapped tightly in the remnants of trauma, the echo of her brother's betrayal lingering bitterly in her mind. Silas caught a glimpse of the internal struggle etched across her face, the way her shoulders slumped despite his presence. He sensed an emotional distance, an invisible barrier the events had forged between them. As they walked away from the auction that had stripped her of everything, he felt the weight of her silence. There were no words to bridge the chasm, only unspoken fears tethering her to the past. The protective rancher had bought a girl, but the road to healing would demand more than mere ownership. It would require the relentless effort of trust in a world that had betrayed her time and again. The sun began to set behind the rugged hills, casting long shadows across the vast expanse of land that stretched out before Ilara. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the dry dust of the ranch kicked up around her boots, settling into the creases of her jeans. A chill wind whispered through the barren landscape, a symbol of the stark transition from the chaos of her past life to the uncertain stillness of her new home. Ilara took a deep breath, the air thick with the earthy scent of hay and leather, mingled with something more, something that felt like solitude. Silas stood a few paces away, hands shoved deep into his pockets, his rugged silhouette framed against the crimson sky. The ranch house loomed behind him, wooden bones creaking under the weight of the evening. He looked imposing, with broad shoulders and an expression carved from stone, but there was an undercurrent of something softer lingering in his eyes. Ilara's heart pounded at the unfamiliarity of this moment, and she fought against the instinct to retreat, to bury the gnawing anxiety that accompanied her. He gestured for her to follow him inside, the door opening with a groan that echoed into the emptiness of the house. The interior was cool and dim, the faint smell of wood smoke lingering like a warm embrace. Ilara's fingers brushed the rough-hewn banister as she stepped inside, a sense of displacement washing over her. Memories were absent, replaced by an unsettling void, like a canvas waiting for the artist's hand. Silas moved through the house with a quiet purpose, opening windows to let in the fading light, as if he too sought to banish the shadows. Every corner of the place felt heavy, but still, laden with old stories and secrets whispered through the walls. Ilara instinctively wrapped her arms around herself, clutching the thin cardigan she wore as if it could shield her from the uncertainty that loomed. Silas glanced back, his expression unreadable, and they exchanged a gaze laden with unspoken questions. In that moment, she longed for the ease of familiarity, for the laughter shared in crowded spaces. But here, all that resided was silence, punctuated only by the creaks and moans of the ranch settling into night. As darkness fell, the only sounds that punctuated the stillness were the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft, rhythmic call of distant owls. Silas had taken to preparing dinner, moving methodically around the kitchen, the clanging of pots and pans piercing the quiet air. Ilara stood at the edge of the room, a silent observer. She had no idea how to navigate the intimacy of this domestic setting, or if she even belonged here. What was she supposed to say to fill the void, to reach out across the chasm of her lost memories? Silas turned, catching her gaze as if sensing her turmoil. "You can help if you want," he said, his voice low, but it broke through the barrier of silence, offering something tangible to grasp. With a nod that felt inadequate, Ilara moved closer, trying to shake off the heavy mantle of uncertainty. Together, they worked in silence, their movements synchronized as they chopped vegetables and stirred pots, an unspoken connection weaving between them like a fragile thread. In that small kitchen, the aroma of simmering spices slowly began to replace the weight of the air. Silas spoke occasionally, sharing snippets of his life, his childhood spent in these very hills, while Ilara listened, absorbing the warmth of his words. She sensed the walls of her isolation begin to crack, each moment spent in his company a hopeful promise of something more, even as the flickering candlelight danced in tandem with the shadows clinging to the corners of her mind. In the afterglow of their modest meal, as they sat in the fading light, Ilara felt a sudden swell of courage. She turned to Silas, the weight of her questions pressing heavily against her. "What if I don't remember who I am?" The words tumbled out, raw and vulnerable. She could feel the tremor in her voice. It was a confession and a plea cloaked in fear. Silas studied her for a moment, his expression softening, and for the first time, she caught a glimpse of the man beneath the stoic exterior, a protector, a guardian of the quiet that enveloped them. "Maybe you've been given a new chance," Silas finally replied, his voice steady, laced with sincerity. "A chance to discover who you were meant to be." The warmth of his gaze ignited a flicker of hope within her, one that whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, she could forge her own identity in this haunting place. As darkness enveloped the ranch like a thick blanket, a flicker of connection sparked between them, a promise of more than just silence, a burgeoning trust wrapped in the quietude of their shared solitude. The sun rose over the sprawling pastures, painting the sky in hues of lavender and gold, casting a warm glow over the ranch. Silas stepped out of his modest home, inhaling the earthy scent of hay and freshly turned soil. The morning routine beckoned: feed the horses, check the fences, and tend to the crops. Yet a part of his mind lingered on Ilara, the girl whose arrival had shifted something deep within him. She had become an enigma wrapped in daily chores, a stranger still adjusting to the life he had carved out for himself. Silas spotted her in the distance, standing by the water trough, her hands submerged in the cool, clear water. The sunlight caught the strands of her hair, illuminating them like a halo. She leaned down, lost in thought, and Silas felt an inexplicable pull toward her. He approached, digging his boots into the dirt, the familiar sound of hooves echoing behind him as their horses nickered in greeting. "Morning," he called softly, hoping to break the spell that seemed to hold them apart. Ilara looked up, startled. Her eyes, pools of uncertainty, met his. "Good morning," she replied, her voice hesitant, tinged with a hint of something deeper, an emotion that lingered just beneath the surface. Silas admired her resilience, how she had begun to adapt to life on the ranch, yet a shadow of her past loomed over her, unspoken and heavy. He remembered the first time she had spoken those strange words, the Latin flowing from her lips like an ancient incantation. He had been captivated, his heart racing with the realization that there was more to her than met the eye. As days turned into weeks, Silas organized their daily routine, steadying it like the rhythm of horse hooves against the dirt. They worked side by side, pulling weeds from the fields, laughing gently as they chased the goats that seemed to delight in escaping the fences. Silas couldn't help but notice a softening in Ilara's demeanor. Her smiles became less cautious, her laughter more frequent. But still, she guarded the corners of her mind like a fierce sentinel, and Silas found himself aching to breach the walls she had built. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the shade of an ancient oak, Silas found the courage to venture into the uncharted territory of her memories. "What do you remember, Ilara?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hung heavy between them, a loaded question wrapped in potential revelation. Ilara's expression shifted, her brow furrowing slightly. There are only fragments, she replied, her gaze fixating on the ground. Fleeting images of a life that feels distant. Silas felt an unfamiliar pang at her admission, a blend of sympathy and frustration. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the distance between them felt insurmountable. "What if I helped you remember?" he proposed, hope flickering within him. "We could talk about it, revisit places that might spark something." Ilara turned to him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "What if I don't want to remember?" she retorted, voice edged with defiance. "What if some things are better left in the shadows?" The silence that followed sprawled like the afternoon sun, stretching and contorting. Silas's heart raced with a mix of longing and confusion. He wanted nothing more than to protect her, to shield her from the fears that whispered to her in the dark. But as he studied her, he realized she was not merely a damsel in distress. She was strong, fiercely independent, and the flicker of pain in her eyes ignited an intense desire within him to fight for the woman she could be. Days turned into a blend of crisp nights under the stars and warm afternoons spent working the land. Silas could feel the tension between them, an electric charge that pulsed each time their eyes met. He wrestled with his emotions, trying to categorize them, but they slipped through his fingers like sand. Ilara's laughter became a lifeline, a melody that underscored the struggles of ranch life, yet her sorrow dragged at his heart. Every attempt he made to connect further seemed to push them back, like two opposing forces caught in an invisible struggle. Ilara's spirit was indomitable, yet Silas could see the weight of her uncertainty. It lingered like a storm cloud, casting a shadow over their budding friendship. As he watched her navigate the fine line between acceptance and resistance, he wondered if he was a mere interlude in her journey. What had brought her here, and what would it mean for her to reclaim her past? Silas was determined to help her, yet the specter of her lost memories loomed larger than any fence he could mend, and he feared that he might lose the elusive connection they had forged. Underneath the expansive sky, amidst the rustling leaves and distant calls of wildlife, Silas and Ilara existed in a delicate balance, teetering between the palpable tension of the present and the haunting shadows of the past. Their lives intertwined within the daily rhythms of the ranch, yet the deeper truths remained locked in silence, waiting for the moment when their secrets would finally be laid bare. Ilara sat on the porch of the modest ranch house, the blistering sun casting long shadows across the cracked wood. The air was thick with the scent of hay and the distant rustle of the wind through the fields. Silas moved about, his silhouette outlined against the golden glow of the setting sun, working on the fence that separated the cattle from the horses. Despite the distance between them, Ilara could feel the tension pulsing like a live wire. Her mind was a swirling storm, fragments of thoughts and emotions crashing into one another. The vast emptiness of her past gnawed at her insides, a void she had tried to fill with Silas's kindness and the routine of ranch life. She recalled fleeting moments, the warmth of his hand when he'd help her with the chores, the gentle rumble of his laughter when she stumbled over her words. But the shadows of her past loomed large, filling the gaps where memories should have been. Today, though, something sat heavier in her chest, a feeling that she couldn't quite shake off. As Silas approached, a bucket of water in his hands, Ilara felt her pulse quicken. The sunlight bathed him in a golden hue, illuminating the strength of his frame and the sincerity in his deep-set eyes. He placed the bucket down beside her with a quiet thud, the tension palpable in the air. She could see the concern etched on his face as he studied her, sensing her distance. He was a rock, steady and enduring, but today felt different. She turned her gaze to the horizon, the colors shifting softly from vibrant oranges to dusky purples, a spectrum that mirrored her turmoil. "Are you all right?" Silas's voice broke through her reverie, low and steady like the hum of a guitar. Ilara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his inquiry settle over her. She wanted to tell him everything, to unearth the buried emotions and fears, but the words tangled in her throat like vines. "I'm fine," she managed to say, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. She was not fine. This facade of normalcy was beginning to crumble beneath the weight of silent questions. As she met his gaze, she saw a flicker of disappointment, a flash of something deeper. Perhaps he thought her refusal to confide in him was a rejection of him, of the bond they had begun to forge. She felt the sudden urge to recoil, to protect herself from the vulnerability that threatened to wash over her. "Are you sure? You seem distant." Silas's brow furrowed, and for a moment there was a ghost of doubt that danced across his features, as if he feared he had overstepped his bounds. The distance she had created felt insurmountable, and yet at that moment Ilara realized that he was reaching out. He was trying to understand the essence of her, the part that remained hidden in the fog of her lost memory. Ilara hesitated, her heart thudding wildly. The truth teetered on the edge of her lips, but the fear of exposing her vulnerability gripped her tightly. What would he think if he knew she was still haunted by shadows of her past? That the emptiness within her often screamed so loud it drowned out the world. "Sometimes I feel lost," she finally admitted, each word a fragile blade slicing through the air between them. At those words, she saw the flicker of something deeper in Silas's eyes, a storm of empathy forming just beneath the surface. "We all have days like that," he said softly, his voice soothing as a balm. "You don't have to be alone in this. You can talk to me, Ilara. I want to help." His sincerity rippled through the air, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. Silas stepped closer, and the distance between them shrank, the walls she had built around her heart seeming just a little less formidable. But then a fleeting shadow crossed her mind. The faces of her cousins, the betrayal that had thrust her into this life. Silas was kind, but could he truly understand? In her heart, a small voice whispered that she could trust him, yet the fear still held her captive. She turned her gaze from him again, the sunset's colors mingling with her swirling emotions, unsure of where this fragile, burgeoning connection could take her. Would it lead to healing, or would it deepen the scars she bore? The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm, golden hue across the sprawling ranch. Ilara stood at the edge of the paddock, her heart racing as she clutched the smooth, worn leather of the reins. Silas watched her from the distance, leaning against the fence, his arms crossed over his broad chest. The air was thick with the scent of hay and earth, yet an unshakable tension filled the space between them. Ilara could sense it like a storm brewing on the horizon, a connection that neither of them dared to fully acknowledge. As the horses grazed peacefully, Ilara's gaze drifted to Silas. He always seemed to emanate strength, a quiet kind that wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. The panic of her fragmented memories felt lighter when she was near him, as if the weight of her past was tethered to the earth and she could float, however briefly, above it all. But still, shadows loomed at the edges of her mind, gnawing at her as she tried to piece together the fragments of her identity. Silas pushed off the fence and approached. His footsteps were deliberate, accentuating the distance he had covered. Ilara's breath caught. The way he walked toward her, purposeful yet careful, made her heart flutter like a trapped bird. She turned her attention back to the horses, focusing on their rhythmic movements instead of the racing thoughts that threatened to overwhelm her. The sun's rays danced upon the mane of a chestnut stallion, and a hint of a smile flickered across her lips. "Would you like to ride?" Silas asked, his gravelly voice slicing through the silence like a blade. Ilara felt her cheeks flush, surprise mingling with something else, a warmth that spread deep within her. She hesitated, recalling her first encounter with the horses, the way their immense power and grace had both frightened and fascinated her. Riding felt like a leap into the unknown, but Silas's presence made the prospect less daunting. "Just don't let me fall," Ilara replied, her voice a whisper, carrying with it an unspoken trust. Silas nodded, a glimmer of warmth flickering in his eyes. His hand reached out, brushing against hers as he guided her to a gentle mare. The touch was electric, sending a surge of emotion through her that she couldn't quite define. It felt as if he were anchoring her to the present, a bridge across the chasm of her lost memories. With careful precision, Silas helped her mount the sleek animal. The world around them faded as Ilara settled into the saddle. The euphoria of her newfound freedom surged through her veins, but it was tethered to Silas's presence. He mounted his own horse beside her, their eyes locking in a moment that felt like eternity, a shared understanding passing between them without words. In that instant, she felt as if the pieces of her broken self were aligning within her, resonating with his spirit. Riding side by side, they traversed the open fields, Silas guiding her with gentle nudges and quiet encouragement. The sun dipped lower, and the horizon blazed in hues of orange and purple. Ilara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. With every step of the horses, she found herself opening up, not just to the thrill of the ride, but to Silas himself. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, a force that drew her in like a moth to a flame. Suddenly, a dark cloud passed over their peaceful moment. A distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky, stirring an inexplicable fear within Ilara. It was as if the storm mirrored the turmoil inside her, a tempest of uncertainty, memories just out of reach. She glanced at Silas, searching for solace in his expression. To her surprise, he looked back with an unwavering gaze, his jaw set with determination. "Stay close," he said, his tone a steady anchor amid the chaos brewing overhead. Ilara nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for his presence, a promise that she wouldn't be lost to the storm. As they rode into the gathering darkness together, she could almost believe that she was not just a girl void of memory, but someone who finally had a place, a connection rooted in the earth and sky, anchored in Silas's steadfast spirit. She whispered something under her breath, words that felt ancient, pouring from her lips without thought, a name she couldn't yet grasp, but felt she had known all along. In that fleeting moment, Ilara began to understand. Her story was entwined with his, and with every passing mile, she sensed they were unraveling the threads of fate that bound them together. Ilara stood on the edge of the pasture, the sun warming her face as a gentle breeze tousled her hair. Silas's ranch sprawled before her, the golden fields stretching into the horizon. It was beautiful yet surreal. Each day she woke up in this place, remnants of her forgotten past gnawed at her insides like a hungry animal, urging her to reclaim the voice that had been so cruelly silenced. The wind whispered secrets she could not grasp, and the vibrant colors of the wildflowers appeared to dance around her, teasing her with memories just beyond her reach. Silas entered her line of sight, his broad frame silhouetted against the sprawling sky. He moved with a steady grace, a quiet strength emanating from him that seemed to anchor her in this new world. But every time he looked at her, she felt a storm brewing inside, a fierce desire to tell him everything she felt, everything she was beginning to understand. Yet her tongue remained a captive, tangled in the chains of her lost memories. Each attempt to speak sent her heart racing, fear flooding her veins like icy water. Would he still look at her with those kind eyes if she failed? The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the land, and Ilara's heart ached with the weight of her silence. She could see the kindness in Silas's eyes every time he brought her tea or shared stories of the old days, but a deep-rooted fear kept her trapped in her own mind. What if she spoke and everything went wrong? What if she were lost forever in the unfathomable depths of her own words? It would be easier to remain invisible, to let the silence envelop her like a comforting shroud. But as she watched Silas tending to the horses, her resolve began to crumple under the pressure of her longing. The moment stretched, and Ilara fought against the impulse to turn away. Suddenly, she felt a spark, a flicker of something ancient. In the soft evening light, The shadows on the ground began to shift and morph before her eyes, and she gasped as a vision flashed through her mind. A dark room, flickering candles, and voices chanting in an unfamiliar rhythm. The echoes of a language she had never consciously known resonated within her, awakening a primordial urge to connect. The intricacies of her lost voice whispered to her, begging to be freed. With a trembling sigh, she stepped forward, the weight of her hesitation almost paralyzing. She had spent days wrestling with her silence, but now it felt like shackles binding her to despair. "I can't," the thought echoed in her mind. But as she watched Silas, his hands deftly combing through the manes of the horses, that unyielding warmth inside her ignited. The walls around her heart began to crack, tiny fissures allowing light to seep through. Could she really take that step? Was she ready to embrace the risk of vulnerability? Silas caught her gaze and smiled, a gentle curve of his lips that made her heart swell. The kindness emanating from him was intoxicating, each unspoken word between them wrapped around her like a warm blanket. She could feel it now, the strength of connection, pulsing with life. The vision returned, clearer this time, the flickering candlelight guiding her forward. Latin words danced on the tip of her tongue, unfamiliar yet familiar, laden with emotion and meaning that felt like home. Why not give in to the pull? Ilara's breath caught in her throat. In that moment, it felt as though the very essence of her being converged at the precipice of release. She stepped closer, her heart racing as she struggled against the tide of uncertainty. Silas looked at her with such tender patience, his eyes deep, offering her a safe space to explore the storm within. "Speak!" He seemed to beckon without words, the silent encouragement surging through the air between them. With a sudden rush of courage, Ilara channeled the energy coursing through her, allowing the words to spill forth. "Dico ad te," she whispered, her voice trembling, yet imbued with a fervor that surprised even her. I speak to you." The language flowed from her lips like a river unchained, the ancient syllables pouring forth, wrapping around her like a cocoon. Each sound felt like a resurrection, an awakening of parts of her soul that had lain dormant for so long. Silas stood still, his eyes widening in astonishment. The world around them faded into a silent backdrop, leaving only the two of them and the newfound connection shared in that sacred moment. Ilara's heart soared, a tumult of emotions crashing against her chest, fear transforming into an exhilarating sense of freedom. She had begun to reclaim herself, to weave her way back into existence. And in that vulnerability, she saw the truth in Silas's eyes, a reflection of her own courage rising from the depths of her silence, waiting to soar. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting an amber glow over the ranch, its rays streaking through the worn wooden slats of the porch where Ilara sat. The weight of silence pressed heavily upon her heart, mingling with the memories that flickered like moths against the bright backdrop of dusk. Silas moved quietly around the yard, the familiar creak of his boots against the weathered boards punctuating the stillness. Each sound seemed to draw Ilara further into her own turmoil, each glance at Silas igniting the smoldering embers of feelings she struggled to articulate. It had been weeks since he had brought her here, away from the shadows of her past, and still the fog of forgetfulness clung to her like a second skin. Silas had given her a home, a sanctuary, but the corners of her mind remained shrouded. Still, fragments of her life whispered through the haze, flashes of laughter, the warmth of familiar voices, but always ending with a gutting emptiness. What she was searching for felt just out of reach, taunting her with its elusiveness. Silas paused in front of her, his silhouette framed by the sun's golden light. His expression was softened by the warmth of the fading day, yet concern etched deeper lines across his brow. "You all right?" His voice was low, a deep rumble that resonated with care, filling the space between them. Ilara's heart raced, a wild animal caught in a cage. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything was fine, but the truth was more complicated than that. She shifted in her seat, feeling the rough wood beneath her fingers. Ilara examined the ground, as though her response lay buried beneath the dust at her feet. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she finally breathed, vulnerability crackling in the air like a summer storm. "I want to remember, but it's like reaching for smoke." The admission hung between them, raw and trembling, and she dared a glance at Silas. His eyes held a universe of understanding, an ocean of patience and acceptance. Silas stepped closer, kneeling before her, bringing them to eye level. "You're not alone in this. We'll uncover it together," he assured her, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek. The warmth of his palm against her skin sent shivers down her spine. In that moment, she felt a flicker of something vibrant, something alive. Yet, it all felt intertwined with the fear of being lost to him. "Silas," she whispered, the name almost lost in the wind. The syllables tumbled from her lips, unbidden, yet filled with an intensity that caught even her off guard. The moment bloomed, heavy with meaning and emotion, as she searched his gaze, desperate for connection. It was as if a dam had broken inside her, releasing the flood of feelings she had kept at bay for far too long. But before she could unravel the full breadth of her thoughts, the shadows of doubt crept back in. "But what if I don't find who I was? What if I can't become who you think I am?" The words trembled between them, a fragile bridge built on fear. Ilara could feel her heart racing, every beat echoing the uncertainty she felt about her own identity, about her place in this burgeoning relationship with the man before her. "Who you were doesn't define who you can be," Silas replied, his voice steady and unwavering. "You're Ilara, that's enough for me." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, pulling her closer to the possibility of hope. She saw in his eyes a faith that made her ache, a belief that she was worthy of love, irrespective of her past. Slowly, it began to sink in, the idea that she could reclaim herself, that she could build anew. "Silas," she said again, the strength in his name growing, reverberating through her. Each time she spoke it, a piece of her began to come back alive. The girl who needed protection, who could be loved fiercely without conditions. Ilara's breath caught in her throat, swelling with an emotional tide that forced her to confront the depths of her feelings. In that intimate moment, she reached out, taking his hand in hers, feeling the warmth of their connection ignite a sense of belonging deep within her. As the last light of day faded, leaving the world wrapped in twilight, Ilara drew closer to Silas. He was her anchor in a sea of uncertainty, and with each breath, she found clarity. "I am Ilara," she stated, her voice steady, "and I choose to stand in this moment with you, Silas." The truth resounded with a powerful finality, and she felt the bonds of her past beginning to dissolve, replaced with a future shimmering with possibility. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden hue over the sprawling fields, where wildflowers danced in the gentle breeze. Ilara stood at the edge of the pasture, her fingers brushing the delicate petals, each touch igniting fragments of an elusive past. Silas approached, his presence steady and warm, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them like the evening mist. He knelt beside her, the earth cradling his hands, and together they watched the sky bleed into shades of crimson and lavender. A distant hawk soared overhead, a silent guardian tracing circles in the fading light. Ilara, feeling the pulse of the land beneath her feet, closed her eyes, allowing the whispers of a language long forgotten to rise from deep within her. A melody of connection, of home. Silas reached out, his fingers entwining with hers, anchoring her to this moment, this place. The world around them faded to a hush, and in that stillness they shared a breath, a quiet acknowledgement of the uncharted path ahead. With a gentle squeeze, he offered all that he was, protection, understanding, love, as the first stars blinked into existence, illuminating their journey, together at last, in the vast embrace of the night.